guys, a lot of you have requested this video for literally years, so figure we're just gonna get it over with and I'm going to do it. This is the ultimate guide to getting into live model horse showing. As you guys know, I've been showing for a really long time. It's been about 7.5 years now, so I would say I'm pretty well versed in everything. However, I will preface this video by saying that it focuses almost entirely on halter showing, which is basically where you just put the horse on the table and the horse is judged. I'm not going to get into performance showing, which is tacking up the horse and putting it in a realistic scene, and I'm also not going to get into collector classes, which is where you have at least 8 horses that are put together in some sort of unifying theme, whether it be mold, color, dates, simply because I really haven't shown in those divisions, so I don't think I'm really qualified to speak on them. So we're going to be focusing mostly on halter and also mostly on original finish models, which are models that have been store-bought and have not been altered in any way, shape, or form. However, halter showing is pretty similar throughout all the different divisions. So you have original finish plastic, custom, artist resin, original finish china, custom glazed china. They're all kind of the same, and they're all kind of judged on the same things. So just keep that in mind. And because I'm American, this is going to focus a lot more on the American style of showing. So I'm going to be referring to a lot of American websites and associations. So I apologize if you're part of the international hobby community. There are lots of other resources that are very similar to the American ones, so if you poke around on Google a little bit, you should be all set. So you've learned about model horse showing, you think, oh, that sounds kind of cool. So your next question is, where do I find them? So where you want to start is called the North American Model Horse Shows Association, but it's commonly referred to as simply NAMSA. NAMSA has what's called regions, which basically splits North America up into 11 different regions of model horse showers, and that's kind of like your home base. I believe they have a similar thing in real horse showing as well. So NAMSA divides up North America as follows. So first is Region 1, it's Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming. Region 2 is California, Hawaii, Mexico, and Nevada. Region 3 is Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. Region 4 is Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. Region 5 is Arkansas, Kansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas. Region 6 is Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Region 7 is Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee. Region 8 is Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Missouri. Region 9 is Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and West Virginia. Region 10 is Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And Region 11 is all of Canada. So to start out, you're going to want to figure out what region you're in, and then from there, NAMSA has links on their website to various groups. Ever since the internet blew up in the public around like the mid-90s, newsletter groups, especially Yahoo groups, were what most regions used to communicate. And a lot of them still use them now, however, they're starting to be phased out by Facebook groups and websites. So basically just kind of go on NAMSA's website, click around a little bit, find your region, and figure out how your region communicates. So say you're in Region 8, even if you just Google NAMSA Region 8, you should be able to find pertinent information for your region. So for example, I'm in Region 10. Region 10 actually has its own website, so they have like all show listings on there and everything, but they also have a Yahoo group, a Facebook group, and a Twitter account. So basically just poke around, find your region, and that's going to be an excellent starting point for you to find shows in your region. If possible, I highly recommend starting out with a novice show, just because they're made for people who aren't really familiar with how a model horse show works. So it's a lot chiller, it's a lot more slowed down, and the judges are going to be able to answer your questions a lot more frequently than if you were at a regular open model horse show, which is what we call a regular level show. And oftentimes these shows are actually a lot cheaper. So they're an excellent place to start out and learn if you're new to the model horse showing world. So you found a show, you want to go to it, you filled out your entry form, and you sent it in. So now what? You're probably going to have to wait a little while until the show actually happens. Shows are almost always announced a few months in advance, so you're going to have a lot of time to plan. And trust me, you're going to need it. First of all, you want to print out your class list, which is going to have every single class offered in the show. And if a show has multiple divisions, it will be clearly stated, and you'll be able to see, so this is original finish plastic, this is customized, this is artist resin. And it's going to be a list of all these numbers and breed groups and individual classes. Most shows organize their divisions in breed groups. So you'll have something like light breeds, which is stuff like Arabians, Morgans, national show horses, generally light boned horses. Then you might have draft horses, so you have British drafts, European drafts, French drafts, or you'll have ponies, so you'll have British native ponies, you'll have European ponies, you'll have American ponies. A lot of them are based on where the breeds are actually from, and then most of them will have an other division. So if you have like crossbreeds or something like that, and if you have a horse that's a crossbreed that that's from multiple different divisions. So say you have like a thoroughbred Clydesdale cross, most judges will have you decide what breed type your horse fits better and put it in that division. So say if I think it looks a little bit sportier than draftier, I'd put it in other sport versus other draft. And if you're confused, don't worry. A show holder is always ready to help you out. Just shoot them an email, ask your question, and they should get back to you fairly soon. However, I wouldn't recommend going to the show holder for breed divisions just because the judge's decision is usually final on that. So just make a note of the horse in the class you think it goes in, and then if not, just ask the judge on show day. And if you want to save a little time, I highly recommend checking out NAMS's breed reference guide that they put out for NAN every year. I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that fairly soon along with NAN, but that has a lot of common breeds that people show their horses as and a lot of uncommon ones as well, and where it would be placed in NAN, which is the North American Nationals, aka the championship model horse show in North America. So again, that's another good reference to look at if you're unsure of where your horse belongs. Also, make sure to pay attention to class limit. Especially in my region, people bring a ton of horses, and there's usually a lot of people at the show. Like an average show in Region 10 is like at least 50 people, especially in Original Finish, since that's the most popular division. We usually have a 2-horse limit in each class. For example, you can only have 2 Arabians in the Arabian class, you can only have 2 Part Arabians in the Part Arabian class, you can't have 3. Some shows do offer what's called a buy-in, which basically means you might be able to show an additional horse in the class if you pay a fee, which is usually just $1. So you place a $1 bill in front of your horse on the table. But it's getting increasingly common that there's actually no buy-ins in Original Finish again, just because it's such a large division. So keep that in mind when you're putting your class list together. And since this is your first show, I'd recommend not bringing too many horses. My average show string right now is probably about 60 to 75 horses, but at my very first show, I brought 13. So obviously you're learning the ropes. Don't put unnecessary stress on yourself by bringing 50 horses. Just bring a few, maybe like 20 tops, so you have a lot of time to observe what's going on in the shows, talk to people, and you don't run the risk of missing too many classes. Showing lots of horses is fun, but is also extremely stressful, so keep that in mind. And it's also important to choose only your best models. So especially if you're on the younger side, it's common to have horses that have marks and scratches and rubs and chips. Don't bring those horses, because they're not going to place, especially if you're in a really competitive region. Because one of the first things that a judge knocks out in a class is the damaged horses. So if you have a horse with a very visible rub or that's covered in shiny marks, there's a very good chance it's not going to place, and you should just save that spot in your string for something that's more show worthy. And of course, now you're probably wondering, what exactly does the judge judge on? Mainly what the judge is looking at is what we call the ABCs: anatomy, biomechanics, and conformation. Basically, in a nutshell, it's saying, if this model horse was a real horse, could it A, be a viable horse, and B, be a horse that isn't in extreme physical pain? So as you guys probably know, Breyer has become extremely sophisticated with their molds, even say the past 5 to 10 years. So this is the very first Breyer model horse, the number 57 Western horse in Palomino. He's fairly well put together compared to some other Breyer molds, but if you just look at him, he is extremely simplistic. He doesn't have a lot of muscle definition. He's very generic looking. If he was a real horse, he'd be able to walk around just fine, but he's not super detailed. So for that reason, judges aren't a huge fan of him. Obviously, that will vary from judge to judge, and we'll cover that in a little bit. But something like this, he's very cute, but he might not necessarily be the best show horse for breed. And this is Breyer's newest mold, which is Vallegro. And as you can see, he's extremely different from the Western horse as far as detail is concerned. He actually has like muscle rippling, he has very detailed braids, his ears have extreme definition, they're not just little triangles. His hooves are much more detailed, they're not boxy like the Western horses. So this is the kind of horse that would do well at a show, generally speaking. Again, you can't predict what a judge is going to like, but there are a few things that all judges kind of universally agree on, and a horse like Vallegro is most likely going to do better than a horse like the Western horse, just because he's a lot more detailed, he's a lot more sophisticated, he was created by a very well-respected sculptor in the hobby, so he's a better choice for your show string than something simple like the Western horse. One thing to keep in mind though is that just because a mold is new doesn't necessarily mean it's better than an old mold. So a good example I have of this is Make-A-Wish. I do love Make-A-Wish, I love her attitude, but she's not a horse that I would ever put in my show string. The most obvious flaw comes here. So this is her shoulder blade right here, and since, as you probably know, she's like a Frankenstein mold, so she has a different head. When this head was sculpted, she also has a shoulder blade right here. So this horse has 2 shoulders. So if this was a real horse, she would be in extreme pain if she was even alive in the first place. So for that reason, I do not have her in my show string, as lovely as she is. A lot of judges would prefer something like Maureen Love's Proud Arabian Mare. And even though she was released in the 1950s, she's still extremely competitive today, especially if you have older ones in nice shape. She just has a very much more typey appearance. She's much more correct, her anatomy works, and even though she's an example of a more old school Arabian, she still does extremely well, generally speaking. And it's also important to take into account breed standards when you're showing a model horse. For example, you have Fire Magic. Fire Magic is a Friesian. He's also a chestnut Friesian. As you might know, chestnut Friesians are very real and they do exist, however they're not accepted for registry by the Friesian Association. You can show Fire Magic as a Friesian, but depending on the judge you have, they might like him, but at the same time they might not place him because he's a color that's not accepted by the breed registry, even though it does exist, so they might pick something like Goots Infanticacilla over him. Even if, for example, they prefer the old Friesian mold more, he's an example of a Friesian that would be accepted for registry and would be more popular with a Friesian breeder. So as I've already stated a few times, it really just depends on what judges you have as to what will do well. And I have people ask me a lot saying, oh, how does this horse do? What does this horse do in a show? Does this horse win a lot? And the answer is there is no answer. You could have a judge that just really likes old molds, so she might place all old molds and never place a new mold just because she doesn't like them. Or you might have a judge that really likes the Weather Girl over the Proud Arabian Mare, for example. So she'll place Weather Girls over Proud Arabian Mares, but you might have another judge that really likes the Proud Arabian Mare and prefers her, so she'll place the Proud Arabian Mares higher than she will the Weather Girls. If you haven't gotten the moral of the story yet, it's that model horse showing is an extreme crapshoot. You never know what you're gonna get. You could come home with plumb nothing, you could come home winning the whole show. You just don't know. But there's techniques to improving your entry, which is what we're going over right now. Also know that you never have to show a horse as what Breyer brands it as, and oftentimes you can really make your entry stand out by picking a different breed than Breyer has them as. Flash is originally marketed as a Morgan. In my opinion, Flash really doesn't look much like a purebred Morgan. He looks extremely ponyish to me, so almost all of my Flashes are shown as some type of pony rather than a full breed Morgan. So you can show Flash as a Morgan, that's totally fine. If you think he looks like a Morgan, go for it. That is entirely up to you. But I tend to choose like larger pony breeds and pony crosses with horses versus just a regular old Morgan. Just keep in mind, if you have any sort of obscure breeds or weird colors on a common breed, or just anything you don't think a judge would know off the top of their heads, it's important to provide documentation. So a lot of people ask me, oh, how do you come up with your breeds? Where do you find your breeds? Honestly, a really good resource to start at is just the Wikipedia page for a list of horse breeds. For example, I have like Totilas. Totilas is marketed as a Dutch warmblood. So I can show him as a Dutch warmblood, or I can show him as a different kind of warmblood. So I might go to like the Wikipedia page for Dutch warmblood, see what other breeds influence the Dutch warmblood, see what breeds the Dutch warmblood influences now, and might go to a page for like German warmblood breed and pick something off of there. Another good reference to use is what I mentioned earlier, the NAMSA breed reference guide. That's convenient because it's all based on breed type. So say if you have a warmblood and you want a warmblood breed, you can look through those. It's basically just a very delicate art. It's a lot of Google searching, a lot of Wikipedia trawling, a lot of going through breeder websites. There really is no like hard and fast rule how to do it. You just kind of gotta put the time in and research. That's one thing I can't stress enough, is just research, 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 and never ever ever show a horse as just a simple breed type. Never just put warmblood, pony, draft horse. Your horse is not going to do anything. It needs to be a very specific breed, so Hanoverian, Welsh pony section B, Clydesdale. Because if a judge just sees warmblood, that's not nearly specific enough for them to judge off of, and they're just going to pass your horse over. So when I'm putting documentation together, I like to use the age-old saying of KISS, which stands for keep it simple, stupid. One of my biggest pet peeves with I'm showing is gigantic documentation. Multiple pages, books spread out in front of a horse, because not only is it taking up a lot of table space that people need to put their own horses down, but at the same time, you're doing the judge a huge disservice, because they're going to have to read that whole thing. That's just going to drag the show on for longer, and they're already having a really long and stressful day, and they really don't need to read 3 paragraphs about the origin story of your breed and all these like foundation stallions and stuff. Just say developed in Ireland by so and so in this time, not once upon a time blah 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 had a horse and he bred him to this other horse and they made this really pretty horse and he like bred that horse with more horses and then he started selling them all throughout Ireland and da 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 da. It's not necessary. This is an example of one of my breed reference cards. My rule of thumb is never make it more than 1/3 of a page long. So my general thing I do is I just have the breed name, a picture of the horse, and a couple paragraphs on the origin of the breed standard, and what kind of colors it comes in essentially. Make sure you know what colors a breed can come in and cannot come in. Back to our old friend Make-A-Wish. Make-A-Wish cannot be a purebred Arabian because she's Palomino and the cream gene is not present in the Arabian breed. Therefore, there's no such thing as a Palomino purebred Red Arabian. And Vignette can't be any flavor of Welsh pony because she's a Tobiano Pinto, and no Pinto markings are allowed in any type of Welsh pony. And I always try to cite my sources. It's a very good habit to get into. It's not necessarily needed, but I started doing it when I began showing at the Breyerfest Open show because it's something they highly recommend, and it just kind of gives your reference a little bit more credibility. The more concise, the better. Also, if your show is judging on collectability, some of them double judge halter shows, so you'll have halter and collectability being judged at the same time, or a separate collectability division. You're going to want documentation for that as well. Basically, you're just saying this is what the horse is, this is why it's collectible. Mine are even simpler than my breed reference cards. This is an example of one of my collectability cards. I just have the item number if there is one, in this case there isn't, the name of the model, when it was produced, how many were produced if it was a limited run, and why it's collectible. So this is just for my Joey Warhorse. It's extremely simple. In my opinion, you really don't need a photo of the horse just because the model is sitting right in front of the judge. And when it comes to collectability, there's a good chance that you have a horse that you want to show in collectability, but you don't necessarily know exactly who it is. My favorite resources for identifying Breyer models, first is the Breyer Animal Collector's Guide. This was published in 2008, so it covers basically all Breyer models up until 2007, but it's an excellent pictorial reference. Highly recommend picking up a copy if you can. Or if you want to stick to online, I use the website identifyyourbreyer.com, which basically lists everything by size, then mold, and then you kind of just click through and identify your horse from the pictures. Fairly simple to do. You gotta be sure you're using the correct terminology when you're making a collectability card, because it's unfair to other showers if you're trying to lead the judge on to think that what you have is something that it's not. Well, I see this a lot with the sample models. I know I've talked about them a little bit on and off, but essentially what they are is they pop up at Breyerfest every year. These models were painted in China, but they're from the first run before the model goes into actual production. They're a final spot check. They send them off to New Jersey before the model is put into production. I see these mislabeled a lot as test models. They are not test models. They are not test models. A test model is painted in New Jersey. It's one of a kind or one of very, very few, and that's exactly the opposite of what a sample model is. It's painted in China. It's one of a dozen or 2 dozen. It's extremely similar to the final run, except it might be a little bit better because China's trying to impress Breyer. But at the end of the day, it's not a test model. I cannot stand it when I see a sample model listed as a test model. You're misleading the judge. A judge has to kind of assume that you're telling the truth, basically. They can't really accuse you of mislabeling a model. The best they can do is just not place it. So just be smart about what you're putting on your collectability cards. So now you've chosen what models you want to bring. You're pretty sure you have your show string all in order. You've looked over everything. Everyone's in good condition. You got your breed set. You got your documentation set. So now what's the next step? So the last thing you need to do is basically make your identifications for your models. Depending on your region, you're either going to be using paper tags or you're going to be using index cards. I'm only familiar with the tags. I do not really know how the index card system works. All I know is that you basically are writing what would be on a tag on an index card, and the judge takes those index cards when they place, and then if your horse is going into the championship, you have to make a new card. So in Region 10 we have what's called the Region 10 Tag Manager. So you're assigned a 3-digit number, that's your exhibitor number, and each horse you have, you give them their own 3-digit number. So for example, this is for my foil again. My number is 630, his number in my system is 118. So his number is 630-118. And then we also have the breed, he's a standard bred, his gender, he is a gelding, and then in the bottom we have OFP, which stands for Original Finished Plastic. At the back, they have his name and my name. So depending on what region you're in, you might have the breed on one side, the name on another side, your name on another one, you might just put your initials. Again, it's one of those things that you kind of have to learn when you discover your region and get into the whole nitty-gritty about how it works. So at this point, you're basically all set to pack. You're going to want to package your horses safely so they're not damaged in transit. I recommend using bubble wrap. Make sure if you're wrapping a horse in bubble wrap that you wrap it with the bubbles facing away from the horse, because if you get into higher temperatures, the bubbles can actually melt onto a horse, which is very messy and you don't want. So make sure the horse is facing the flat side of the bubble wrap. And if you want to be a little bit more careful, you can also use fabric. So some people use old t-shirts or fleece or muslin. I personally use fleece, or there's these little thingy-mabobbers that, depending on who you buy them from, they're often called like pony pouches or pony totes. Basically, they're padded bags and they have like a Velcro closure to keep your horses safe. That's what I use for my more expensive models. So when you're transporting your models, most people will use a plastic bin or multiple plastic bins depending on how many horses you're bringing. And when you're packing your models, make sure that you lie them face down and don't try to overcrowd your bins before you close everything up. Don't forget to put in your tablecloth, which will come in extremely handy when you get to the show. So you've woken up and today's finally the day of your very first model horse show. Trust me, you will be tired. These things start very early in the morning. Drive off to your destination and you arrive at the show hall. But when you first enter, there's probably going to be some sort of greeter there, and 9 times out of 10 it's the show manager themselves. So you just tell them your name and they will give you the whole show packet and anything that you need. So there'll usually be like an extra copy of the class list, maybe a name tag, and if you want you can totally mention to them that this is your first show and they'll probably offer you some advice as to like who to talk to, invite you to ask any questions that you might have, and definitely take advantage of the opportunity if you need to. You'll walk around the show hall and you'll find your table spot. Unless you've prepaid for a full table, most likely you're gonna have a half table. So usually it's just kind of names plastered down on each of the tables. Find your spot and put your tablecloth down. But just in case there's any domino fatalities, there's at least a nice soft surface so the horse isn't hitting just hard plastic. The show hall, but there's a bunch of tables with all the, and now you basically just unpack your models and wait for the show to start. You're going to see a lot of people around you, and you're definitely going to see people you want to talk to because they have nice horses and so on and so forth. It's important to remember that not everyone at a model horse show is super talkative. Like, I'll admit I get like super in the zone when I'm showing, and I might come off as a little bit cold, but it's more just because I'm so focused on everything that I really don't want to talk, if that makes any sense. I have a lot of horses, I gotta really keep track in my mind, like who's on the table, who's up next, who got pinned, blah blah blah. Especially in the morning when everyone's unpacking, it isn't the best time to approach people to talk. Everyone's stressed because a lot of people will be there kind of late and they want to make sure they get all their stuff unpacked before the show starts and they don't want to miss any classes. So just unpack your horses and let everyone else unpack. This goes without saying, but don't touch anyone's horses without their permission, obviously. So you'll see in the center of the show hall that there's a bunch of tables with all these labels that say ring and a number. So you might have like ring 1, ring 2. This is where the show actually takes place, and depending on your division you might be showing at different rings. So like a lot of shows at Region 10 I believe have 8 rings. Rings 1 and 2 for original finished plastic, 3 and 4 for custom, 5 and 6 for artist resin, 7 and 8 for, I don't know, China or something. Just keep in mind where your horses are going to be showing. Depending on the size of the show, there might also be a board at the front of the room that kind of just explains what's happening in each ring and what class is currently up, what class is closed, blah blah blah. If there is a board, just keep an eye on it. So the show holder will probably make an announcement when the show actually begins, and they'll call the first classes. So you'll probably hear something along the lines of, first call for OF Arabian on ring 1. If you have an Arabian going in the Arabian class, you take it, you bring it over to ring 1, you put it on the table, put down any breed documentation or collectability info that you might need, and just leave it there. So the judge and our show holder will continue with more announcements. There'll be second call, which basically means, hey, this class is being loaded, just in case you didn't hear. Final call, which means, okay, this class is almost ready to be closed, so if you have any last minute horses that need to go up, please let us know and we will let you in. And afterwards they will say class is closed, which means there are no more horses allowed to be put on the table and the class is closed for judging. And I know it's going to be tempting to kind of hover around the judge and see what they're placing and looking at, but just try not to do it because it's a pain for the judges. I mean, you're already in a cramped space with a lot of expensive models, so it's okay to kind of be a bystander, but just don't breathe over the judge's neck. And then a little while later, depending on the size of the class, it could be a little while, so you'll hear an announcement saying, OF Arabian is now pinned, please collect your models, which means that the class has been judged, the ribbons have been laid down, and you can bring your horse back. If you have any questions about how your horse placed or why it placed the way it did or why it didn't place, this is a good time to ask the judge about that. They might not be able to give you a really long-winded answer just because they're in a time crunch and they want to judge as many classes as possible so no one's stuck there until 10 p.m. at night. Say, for example, how can I improve my entry? They'll probably be able to give you a few quick tips and tricks. And especially if you're at a novice show, this is going to be a lot easier because the judges know that everyone here is learning, so they're going to take a lot more time to say, this is why I placed this is why I placed that, this is why I didn't place this. And also, if you're at an approved open level model horse show, you're going to get one of these doohickeys next to your horse if you place first or second. These are called NAN cards, and as I mentioned earlier, they are for the North American Nationals, which is NAMS's championship show held once a year. And where it's located depends on the year. In even years, it's held in Lexington, Kentucky in conjunction with BriarFest, the week before BriarFest weekend, and on odd years, it moves across the country. So for example, like it's in California in 2015, in 2013, it was in Pennsylvania. So in order to show a horse at NAN, they have to win at least one of these. So definitely hold on to them, don't toss them, they're important, and if you ever decide to sell the horse, a lot of people are going to want them with them. What you do is you just kind of fill out the class name and the horse's name and your name. And if you got lucky and your horse placed first or second in the class, they're now eligible for that division championship. So what you should do is put that horse aside, don't pack it up yet, put it aside with their ribbons and wait until championship call. So that's going to be at the end of the division when all the classes have been judged. Everyone who got a first and second in any of those classes is going to bring their horse back up to the ring, put their ribbon next next to them, and they're going to be judged for the final championship. So each show runs a little different. Some do top 5 in a division, some just do champion and reserve champion. So if you're lucky enough and your horse does win a champion or a reserve champion, again, keep that horse aside with their ribbons, because at the very end of the show is going to be the final overall callbacks. So all the original finish models that won champion and reserve champion are going to go back up on the table once again, and there's going to be a grand champion and a reserve grand champion, which in a way you can think of as like best in show. So basically what you're going to be doing all day is just kind of listening for announcements, keeping track of your horses, chatting with people, and just sort of getting into the whole model horse show world. It can be incredibly stressful depending on what you're showing and what caliber you're showing at, but it doesn't have to be stressful by any means at all. If you want to bring 5 horses, that is totally fine. If you want to bring 50 horses, that is fine. If you want to bring 150, I wouldn't recommend it, but yeah, it's still fine. And overall, it's just a really fun way to interact with other people in the hobby and kind of get involved with your model horses a little bit more. So I definitely recommend looking into it if you can. So, closing thoughts on model horse showing. In general, just have good sportsmanship. Know that you're not going to win all the time and you're not going to win everything. Might come away and you don't win anything. Don't let that dishearten you, because there's always other shows, there's going to be other judges. You might just decide you don't like that judge, and you know what? That is totally fine. You never have to like a judge, and if you see they're judging another show, there's no reason that you can't skip out on that show because you just don't like the judge. Totally valid reason. Try not to overwhelm yourself, especially if you're just beginning. Figure out what you're comfortable with showing and just kind of keep it to that limit, so you can actually kind of take in the whole environment of the model horse show and figure out how it works at your own pace. So model horse showing isn't a walk in the park. It is fairly complicated, especially if you want to do super in-depth breed research and classification and collectability. If you want to take it a step further and jump into performance, which is its whole other world in itself. It's a kind of a weird, crazy, fun experience. It's not for everyone, but I definitely recommend you give it a try. So that's basically a very rough guide to your very first model horse show. I hope this encourages more people to go out and enter shows. As I said, they are so much fun and they're such a cool facet of the hobby. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helped.